Greg Chappell, thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Matt. Nice to be with you. Nice to
So,
have someone to talk to.
The obvious question is how is life in lockdown treating you?
Yeah, it's certainly very different. It's probably been about 6 weeks now because I had just returned from a trip to Pakistan just before the lockdown happened. So I sort of voluntarily went into 14 days of reduced exposure to the world. So apart from going out to the shops to get some food, we're still allowed to play golf up here. So I still continued to play golf, but we're playing in pairs, and apart from the person you're playing with, you don't see anyone else on the golf course. So it's actually quite a good place to be. I think it's good for the physical exercise. I like it for the mental stimulation, but it's also the mental health aspect of it, just getting out of the apartment. We live in an apartment. My wife doesn't get out as much as I do, and I don't know how I would have got on if I hadn't had that outlet. That really has been a saver for me.
Well, it's really the shock of the situation, isn't it? Because the last time I spoke to you was the middle of last year when we were talking about the Ashes series and everything that was upcoming and big tours that the Australians were going to be playing in, the World Cup and everything else that was happening. And it's just the suddenness that the whole world has turned on its head, isn't it?
It is, and the shock that comes with it. Obviously, I don't think we've really got our head around just how big an impact this is having on everybody, on all businesses, and sports a business. The sporting world as we know it has changed extraordinarily, and it won't be anything like we've been used to when it comes back, whenever that might be. It's going to be a very different landscape.
Well, as a player and an administrator, have you ever seen anything that rivals this in your experience?
Well, the only thing that goes close to it, obviously, is World Series cricket, which turned cricket on its head and really changed the way people looked at the game, the way they played the game the game was administered, the way the media interacted with the game. So that was a huge shift. That was a real turning point in Australian sport, not just cricket. I think it had a big impact on other sports, how the media was looked upon, how games were televised. Cricket went from being on black and white television with cameras from one end of the ground to all of a sudden being on coloured television with cameras all round the ground, different angles, front on always. So that was a huge change, and that really threw the game into turmoil for a while. It broke down a lot of relationships. People felt let down. But very quickly that sort of came back together. And when I say very quickly, it was a couple of years. We might be looking at a very similar scenario here, in that it will take time for this to wash through, because there'll be a lot of disappointed people. There'll be a lot of angry people. There'll be people that will have lost their jobs, whether it be on the administrative side or on the playing side. Opportunities for young sports people, women's sport, this is going to have a huge impact on the emerging market of women's sport. So, whilst World Series cricket was a turmoil in itself, this is going to be bigger, no doubt.
Do you think, as you mentioned, sport today is such a big business, they rely on that advertising and so many people coming to the grounds, and it's such an industry. Will this have long-term effects, in your opinion, on those leagues, on those institutions, those sporting institutions we all rely on?
Yeah, I think so. Many of the sports had already signed media deals just before this happened. Cricket being one of those sports. The impact on the media outlets that have paid for those rights. Over the next 12 months, they're not going to get much value for those rights. Next time it comes around to television rights, I think it's going to have a huge impact. So the game's going to be having to deal with less income for quite a bit of time. So that's going to impact players' wages. It's going to impact the number of people that are employed in the game. It's going to impact the number of young players that can come into the professional ranks of cricket. We're going to see the game sort of go back to the clubs and to the states. The elite development of players is going to be seriously affected by the loss of income. So that is going to have to be rethought. How do we develop our players? What opportunities do we give them? We won't be able to afford to have national championships at a variety of levels as we've done for both males and females. So a lot of that work will go back onto the states, onto the clubs. Rather than coming straight out of school and going into professional contracts, young players might have to find that they're going to have to work for a living, go to university and train and play part-time and hope that they can break in the way it used to happen. So it's going to have a big impact.
And what about those players? Because as much as we see them as these professional athletes on the world stage, I mean, most of them obviously get into it because they just love the game. What effect is this having that they can't participate in the sport that they love, that they can't hang out with their teammates, that they can't train, that they can't play in these games?
Yeah, I would think that for some of them it will be very tough. The mental health aspect of it, again, to be in lockdown, not to be exposed. A lot of these young cricketers have virtually gone straight from school into professional environments where they're in an environment with a whole bunch of other young people all striving to do their best, playing the game that they love, enjoying the fruits of that from all aspects, not just the financial side of it, but the social side of it, the outlet to express themselves. For many of them, that's their creative outlet. To be removed from that would be very difficult for any length of time.
There's been talk about doing everything that can be done to get the leagues back up and running again, to get sport back in our TVs. And I certainly appreciate how important it is to people, especially at a time like this when everyone's stuck at home. It would be great to be watching sport on TV. Do you think it's worth the risk of fast tracking a return to some of those sporting events?
Well, obviously the risk has got to be weighed up. At some point, we're going to have to face the risk of going back and exposing ourselves to a wider group of people, whether that's in 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years. I think the risk is still going to be there that we'll have a spike in infection. So, there are a lot more wise heads than myself making those sorts of decisions, and I suppose that's why they get the big bucks to make those decisions. But it's not easy because we're talking about people's lives. But on the other hand, we're talking about people's lives if we keep people locked up for too long. The mental health issues that come with that. There'll be people at the other end of this that will have lost their jobs and have no prospects for a job in the immediate future. What impact is that going to have on their lives and their health? So there are much wider aspects of it than just the virus. Obviously, really, really tough times. We haven't been in this area in our lifetime. So there's not much to go on as to what the best course of action is. But the sooner we can get some normality back into our lives, the better it will be for the wider population from a health point of view, even outside the virus. So just weighing up those risks is going to be the big challenge.
Well, it's very well said, Greg, and thank you for sharing your thoughts as a sports fan and obviously a great player of the game. And stay safe and healthy, and let's all hope for a speedy end to this. Yeah,
look, I think we've got to think positively, Matt. I've always been a believer that when you're in trouble, you've got to think about, okay, you can get caught up in worrying about the problem rather than looking for what can you do to make it better for yourself in the short term. And I think hopefully a lot of people can have that sort of approach to the next few months and next few years, because it will be a big challenge for all of us. Thanks for the opportunity for a chat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg. Great to talk to you.
Thanks, Matt.
I'm Matt McLaughlin, and thanks for watching Living History TV. Don't forget to subscribe for more great history content.